In 1954, a night shift millwright in Gary, Indiana, walked into a union hall of 300 men who had never met him. He had transferred in that week from a mill 2 states away and owned one good suit and a lunch pail. Within an hour, 4 men had stood him a beer, and the oldest foreman had saved him a seat. He was not loud, and he was not clever. What he carried into that hall were rules, plain habits his father had drilled into him on a porch in Kentucky before the boy turned 10. He used them every shift of his life and never ate his lunch alone. Most of those rules vanished with the men who lived them. They moved through a room differently, not with scripts or seminars or anything off a screen, but with habits carved into them by fathers who knew what kind of man they were building. Those habits made friends at a lunch counter, held a shop floor together, turned a stranger into a neighbor. Every gesture was deliberate. We discarded all of it, not because it stopped working, because television showed us a different man, slicker, louder, easier, and we decided the real one looked old-fashioned beside him. Then the screen rewrote the code, the porch went quiet, and loneliness has climbed every year since. Number 23 took less than a single breath and made the man who used it the one the whole table leaned toward. Number 11 cuts against nearly everything the modern world teaches, and it made a working father impossible to argue with. And number 3, the rule these men enforced more fiercely than any other, is now sold back to corporate managers in a weekend course that runs $3,000 a seat. Their fathers taught it for free. These 30 rules were not about being smooth. They were about being a man other men could lean on. The difference between filling a chair and being the man a room arranged itself around. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 30 gentleman rules working-class fathers lived by that television erased after 1970. Number 30, the hat in the hand. It cost nothing and worked the same for a coal hauler as for a banker. When you came through any door, you took your hat off before you spoke. Right hand to the brim, hat down into the left, and it stayed off until your boots were back outside. By the 50s, it was so universal that some sales companies trained their men against it, certain it slowed the pitch, then put it back when the men who kept doing it outsold the rest. For a teenager at his first interview, that hat said he had been raised by someone. Foreman hired the gesture before the application. Number 29, pause in the doorway. The man others remembered did not spill into a room talking. He stopped at the threshold, one breath. He took in the floor, who was there, where the warmth sat. Which corner held the man nobody had claimed? Then he walked in like he belonged. A boilermaker in Akron taught his son to arrive first and speak second. For a young man entering a room of his betters, that breath was courage made visible. It was a man arriving on purpose. Number 28, cross the room to the man alone. Every gathering had one. The man against the wall, the new hire holding a cup he was not drinking, the stranger no one had claimed. You went to him first. A pipe fitter in Cleveland did it everywhere and said the loneliest man would remember you longer than the whole crowd combined. For a boy pinned to the wall at his first dance, the stranger who crossed the floor to him was never forgotten. It cost you the easy talk. It bought you the most loyal man in the building.
Before we go on, I made something special for you. A guide for men like us who still believe a good name and good manners mean something. It's the lost gentleman's code, the old-fashioned manners American gentlemen once lived by. The kind that make you the man everyone respects, welcome in any room you walk into. But these ways are disappearing fast, and once they're gone for good. Don't spend another year being the man people overlook. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link below. Go ahead, I'll wait right here.
Number 27. Rise when someone arrives. You came to your feet the moment another person reached the table, man or woman, young or old. Not halfway. A printer in Omaha taught his son that staying seated told the newcomer he was not worth the trouble of 2 knees. You stood, offered the hand, waited for them to settle before you sat. For a woman walking alone into a room of seated men, the one who rose made her feel safe. Standing up was the cheapest way ever found to lift another man. Number 26. The handshake that held the eye. A handshake was not a greeting, it was a verdict, delivered in 2 seconds. You gripped firm enough to mean it, never hard enough to prove a thing, and held his eye the whole time. A machinist in Detroit told his son, "The man who looks away mid-shake has confessed he cannot be trusted." For a young man measured by a foreman who had hired 1,000 others, that grip said what his nerves were hiding. The hand never lied. Number 25. Learn the name in the first minute. When a man gave you his name, you used it 3 times in 2 minutes. Once at once, once in the middle, once at the parting, on purpose. In the door-to-door decades, when a salesman met 40 strangers a day and a forgotten name killed a sale, this was drilled in as hard as any rule. For a widow who had not heard her name spoken with care since the funeral, a stranger using it 3 times could be the most human moment of her week. Say a man's name back, and you have half won him. Number 24. Never hide the working hand. A man's hands told his story, the burns, the calluses, the grease in the lines. The working father did not tuck them away. He offered the rough hand plainly and let it be read. A welder in Birmingham taught his son that a soft hand had nothing to be proud of, and a hard one nothing to hide. For a boy ashamed of where his father worked, watching that scarred hand go out without apology reset his spine. You did not climb away from your hands. Number 23. Lower your voice when the room got loud. Here is the one that took less than a breath. When the noise rose, weak men raised their voices over it. The man others remembered dropped his. Every broadcaster of the radio age knew it. Volume begs, quiet commands. You spoke just under the noise, so the other man leaned in too. For a tired man drowning in a loud room, that low voice was the first thing all night aimed at him alone. The loud man fights the room. The quiet man owns the one piece that matters. Number 22. Light his cigarette first. When the pack came out, you struck the match for the man beside you before your own. When the coffee came, you slid his cup over first. A foundry hand in Toledo did it for 30 years, for men he would never see again. In 1 second, you had put another man ahead of yourself, and he felt it land where words could not reach. For a stranger far from home, that match was the only warmth he met all day. They remember the man who served them first. Number 21. Notice one true thing and name it. The remembered men saw what others walked past. The watch worn thin at the band, the shine kept on a tired man's only good shoe. You found one true thing and remarked on it plainly with no flattery underneath. A tailor in Newark could meet a stranger and inside a minute say the thing that made him stand up straighter. For a man who felt invisible all week, being seen exactly, not praised but seen, meant more than any compliment about his looks. The notice a man never forgets is the one he did not have to ask for. Here is what nobody says out loud. Before 1970, a boy learned to be a man by watching one in the next chair, his father, the foreman, the old hand at the end of the bar. Then the screen arrived in the living room, and the lesson moved from the porch to the picture tube. The men on television did not light another man's cigarette or cross a room to the fellow alone. They delivered lines and walked away cool. A whole generation studied them instead of their fathers and learned a manhood with the warmth machined out. 1 in 3 American men over 50 now reports having no close friend. We traded a man we could touch for a man on a screen and called it progress. Number 20. Walk them all the way to the door. You did not say goodbye from your chair. You rose and you walked your guest to the door, onto the step, sometimes clear to the car, and you stood there until they had gone. In mill towns, there was a saying, the welcome was manners, but the walk to the door was the truth. For a lonely man braced for the cold goodbye he usually got, that long walk out felt like being wanted. People remember how an evening ended and who stood in the doorway watching them go. Number 19. Speak to the coat check the same as the host. A man's true measure showed in how he treated the people who could do nothing for him. You gave the doorman, the waitress, the girl, taking coats the same eye and the same name you gave the man of the house. A pattern maker in Rockford was known for it across the city. For the girl behind the counter, invisible to every important man who swept past, the one who used her name made her feel like a person again. Kindness aimed upward is ambition wearing a smile. Kindness aimed downward, where it can never be repaid, is the real article, and the whole room marks it. Number 18, carry the heavy end. When something had to be lifted, you took the heavy end without being asked. The harder job, the worse weather, the dirtier half, you reached for it first. A dock worker in Baltimore taught his son that a man earns his place by what he is willing to carry. You took the load others dreaded. For a boy watching his father shoulder the worst of it in silence, that was the whole definition of a man. Strength was never the point. The willingness to spend it on someone else was. Number 17, tell the story against yourself. The remembered man was never the hero of his own tales. When the tables swapped stories, his were the ones where he played the fool, the wrong streetcar, the boss he mistook for a janitor, the flop he could laugh at now. In an age that demanded a man be granite, the one who could grin at his own expense gave everyone permission to breathe. A salesman in Buffalo disarmed every room this way. For the anxious young man, certain he alone never failed, that laughter was a mercy. Bragging built a wall. The story against yourself tore one down. Number 16, dress one notch above the room. You did not dress for yourself. You dressed for the people you were about to stand among. A streetcar conductor in Scranton pressed his one good suit every Saturday night, even when money was thin, and called a clean collar a letter of respect you never had to write. For a poor man who owned almost nothing, that collar was the one thing he could control, and told the room he had not given up. You wore your best not to outshine a soul, but to say the evening was worth the effort. It was effort made visible. Number 15, the pause before you answered. When a man asked you something real, you did not fire back. You let the question land, one breath. Then you answered slowly, like the words were worth the wait. A judge's clerk in Trenton learned it watching his father, who never answered fast. For a man used to being half heard, that held breath was a gift of dignity. Proof his question had reached a thinking man and not a waiting mouth. The quick answer says you were only waiting to talk. The considered one says you were listening. Number 14, never check the clock. When you were with a person, you were with them entirely. You did not glance at your watch or look past their shoulder for someone better. A foundry foreman in Charleston gave every man the feeling he had nowhere else on earth to be. Your full presence was the rarest currency in any room then, and rarer now. For a man used to being one face in a crowd, those few minutes were the most human part of his week. To be looked at fully heals something. Number 13, remember his wife and children. You did not merely know the man. You knew his wife was Ruth. His boy had been down with fever. His girl had just started school. A yard foreman in Roanoke asked after a man's family by name every time for 15 years. For a man who felt like a number all week, that question made him a father again for a minute. 1,000 men ask, "How are you?" The remembered man asks, "How is your daughter?" and uses her name. People are drawn to the one who remembered. Number 12, the hand on the shoulder. A word was good. A word with a hand on the shoulder was unforgettable. At the right moment, whether a congratulation, a comfort, or a goodbye, you laid a hand on his shoulder for the length of a sentence. In a country where a man could go years without a single kind touch, that contact landed like heat in a cold house. A barber in Memphis did it with every man who left his chair carrying something heavy. For a man holding grief, he could not say aloud, that hand said what words were not permitted to. Fathers used it sparingly, which is why it carried such weight. In 2019, researchers studying first impressions expected the test to settle fast. They assumed modern professionals, trained on networking and screens, would outdraw older generations at building trust. They found the reverse. Adults raised on the pre-1970 rules, the steady eye, the offered hand, the name spoken back, were rated more trustworthy by strangers inside 30 seconds than any group measured, and were still remembered weeks later at far higher rates. Television taught a country to perform connection. The fathers had taught their sons to give it. We did not outgrow the old rules. We forgot which one works. Number 11, never try to win the argument. This is the one that cuts against everything we are taught now. When a man held a foolish opinion, you did not crush it. You did not score the point, even when the point was plainly yours. A Union man in Hartford could disagree completely and leave the other fellow respected instead of beaten. You asked a question instead of firing a fact, naming the true thing before you differed. For a proud man who expected to be made small, being allowed to keep his dignity won him for life. The man who wins the argument loses the room. Being someone people want to be wrong in front of is priceless. Number 10, raise your glass to someone else. When a glass went up, it was never to yourself. You toasted the host, the quiet man at the end, the friend who had buried a hard year. The lodge halls and supper clubs of working America ran on toasts like these, a whole economy built on handing your moment to someone who needed it more. For the overlooked man at the end of the table, a raised glass turned every eye toward him for the first time all night. And the room loved the man who gave the moment away. Number 9, carry yourself like the floor was yours. It was in the spine, the shoulders, the unhurried walk. You did not slump and you did not rush. A rail yard foreman in Cheyenne taught his son that a man's bearing spoke a full sentence before his mouth opened. You stood straight without going stiff and moved like the floor was yours, but you were glad to share it. For a young man who felt small among important men, that carriage let him be taken seriously before he had earned it. A man's carriage made the introduction before he did. Number 8, the compliment he couldn't see coming. Anyone could praise the obvious. The remembered man praised the thing a fellow was quietly proud of and never expected a soul to notice, the way he kept his word, the patience he showed. A grocer in Akron named the quiet virtue out loud. For a man starved for one honest sentence about his character, that notice landed deeper than any praise of his face. You named the true thing once and let it sit. A compliment about a man's character reaches where one about his necktie never will. Number 7, let the other man finish. When a man spoke, you let him reach the end of his thought to the last word, and one beat past it. You did not jump in. A schoolteacher's father in Spokane called that held beat the most generous thing a man could give. For a man used to being interrupted, that silence was a respect he rarely met. The man who waited to listen became magnetic, without a word. Silence, offered on purpose, is the loudest form of respect. Number 6, ask the question, then get out of the way. A man could fill an hour talking about himself and leave a stranger cold. The remembered father asked one real question, then went silent for the whole answer. A bricklayer in St. Paul could meet anybody and inside 2 minutes have him talking about what he loved most. You asked about his work, his town, his boy, then let him fill the silence. For a man no one ever asked about, that question was the rarest thing he would hear all month. People walk away from the talker impressed. They walk away from the listener feeling 10 feet tall. Number 5, pay before he reached. When the check came, you had it settled before the other man's hand left his lap. No flourish, no argument over it. A foundry man in Wheeling kept a few quiet dollars aside for this and said a man should never feel the cost of sitting with you. For a proud man short on money, the friend who covered it without comment saved his dignity and never mentioned it. You made it disappear before it could become a moment. Generosity, announced, is just vanity. Done quietly, it is the real thing. Number 4, never complain about what you couldn't fix. The weather, the layoff, the bad back, the working father bore them without turning them into a song. The men who came up in the Depression learned restraint the hard way and carried it like a creed. A complaint is a weight you hand to someone who cannot put it down. A coal man in Pottsville went 30 years without once complaining at the table. For his children, that silence was not coldness but shelter, proof the floor would hold no matter the year. People tire of the man who narrates his troubles. They lean on the one who carries his quietly. In 1955, a foreman at a stamping plant in Flint spent the first 9 minutes of every hire's first day asking about the man, his town, his people, the team he followed. Not 1 minute was about the job. His turnover was the lowest in the plant for 11 straight years. Today, a new hire is onboarded by a 4-minute video, 90% of it policy. Companies now spend billions a year on engagement programs to win back the 9 minutes that foreman gave for free. The screens taught us the human part was the part we could cut. He knew otherwise. He spent the 9 minutes, and the men stayed. Number 3, make the introduction. This is the rule the fathers drilled hardest of all. You did not just work a room for yourself. You connected the people in it to each other. You took the shy new man and the kind old hand and put them together with one sentence about what they shared. A lodge secretary in Lawrence spent every evening introducing strangers who became lifelong friends, and not one forgot whose hand had joined them. For two lonely people who would never have spoken otherwise, that introduction started something neither could have given himself. The man who gathers attention is merely liked. The man who gives people to each other becomes the center of everything. Number 2, say you're wrong without a speech. No excuse, no long story, no soft edges to hide behind. You were wrong, you said so plainly, and you said it right. A stonemason in Hammond apologized to his crew in front of his son with 4 flat words and no defense. The boy never forgot how small the words were or how much they bought. For that crew, an apology with no excuse in it was so rare it bound them to him harder than any favor. People trust the man who can say sorry without a speech, because the speech is where excuses hide. 4 honest words bought back what 1,000 excuses would have spent. Number 1, do the thing you said you'd do. That is the whole of it. No method, no technique, no clever exception. You said you would be there Tuesday. You were there Tuesday. You said you would bring the ladder came. A machinist in Gary built an entire life on never once dropping the smallest promise, until men learned they could hand him anything. For a man let down by everyone who ever made him a promise, the one who simply kept his word became someone he could not do without. This was the plain root beneath every rule on this list, the quiet decency each was only protecting. A man is what he does after he says it. None of these rules required a charm school, a coach, or a single dollar a man did not have. They required a home where someone lived them in front of a boy too young to know he was being shaped. The men who came up before 1970 understood something we have spent 50 years trying to unlearn. Being a man others leaned on was never a gift a lucky few were born holding. It was built from discipline, from 10,000 refusals to make another person feel invisible. The hat in the hand, the name spoken back, the match struck for the other man first. Then the screen came into the front room, showed us a man who did none of these things and still walked away cool, and a whole country decided to study him instead. These rules were never lost to time. They were set down on purpose by sons who believed a picture tube knew more than their fathers did. The working-class father is still there, just inside the doorway, hat in his hand, waiting one quiet beat before he enters. He was only switched off, and the screen never could teach the one thing he knew without trying, that how you make another man feel is the only thing about you that ever lasts.